Hello everyone, I'm CJ Wellerman. Don't forget to click the subscribe button below, and we kindly ask you please help keep our show going and growing by supporting my journalism at patreon.com/CJ Wellerman. You'll be helping me expose more injustices in the Muslim world. Now let's get into it. In the years after the September 11 attacks, New Atheism, a strident anti-religious ideology, emerged from the sewer to challenge Islam and give the United States-led war on terror its desperately needed veneer of intellectual cover. Remember these guys? They dominated headlines, best bookseller lists, and online debates about religion everywhere. And they became insanely rich by blaming 9/11 on Islam and rallying liberals behind the Bush administration's criminal invasion of Iraq. They did this by tying Islam to violence and savagery, while equating the religion of 2 billion Muslims to a virus that threatens human civilization. They want to vanquish Islam to the dustbin of history.
Islam is one of the great evils in the world, and I fear that we have a very difficult struggle there.
Islam at this moment is the motherlode of bad ideas.
Jesus.
So we have.
You can tell it when you see the extreme Muslims talk. They cannot wait. They cannot wait for death and destruction to overtake and overwhelm the world. They can't wait for what I would call, without ambiguity, a final solution.
Their faces were everywhere, and television talk show hosts couldn't get enough of them. Their lies and ignorance about Islam played a central role in convincing Western audiences that the war on terror was fundamentally necessary to control and suppress Muslim populations.
But you would call it the war on Islam. You want to put a flame under the rhetoric and make it even hotter.
It's not a question of flame. The United States was attacked on the 11th of September in the name of Islam.
You see, they transformed atheism into a reactionary social and political movement by turning religious non-belief into an anti-religious crusade. Now, whereas atheism on its own speaks only to non-belief in God and is not anti-anything or anti-anybody, the New Atheists evangelized anti-religion by falsely asserting that anyone who believes in God is by default backwards and potentially violent. In their twisted and demented minds, the religious, particularly Muslims, are to be re-educated, shunned, or eradicated. As I revealed in a recent episode, I too was a New Atheist for a 4-year period after witnessing an Al-Qaeda suicide attack in 2005. I blamed Islam for the violence I had witnessed, as stridently as Hirsi Ali, Dawkins and co. blamed Islam for 9/11. Needless to say, I've seen their vicious anti-Muslim animus and rhetoric at close quarters, having met many of them while speaking at their conferences and on their podcasts. But a few years after learning the Quran from an Islamic scholar in Indonesia, I wrote a book warning the public about the dangers New Atheists pose to Muslims, secular democracy, and human rights.
Wellerman uses his personal journey to issue a warning that although they hide behind slogans of rationalism and humanism, New Atheists are bigoted and provide intellectual justifications for violence against those who do not buy into their worldview. As opposed to seeing all human-on-human violence to be primarily driven by religious beliefs, Wellerman outlines why such a view is simpleton at best.
What makes New Atheists especially dangerous is they have the same binary view of the world as ISIS or the Christian right. Because like them, they divide the world into two, good versus evil. In their minds, those who champion science and decry religion are the enlightened and righteous. But those who maintain a strong religious identity are to be shunned as backwards barbarians. Because if you, like they, actually believe Islam is a cancer or virus, then the logical next step is to eradicate the disease, which is exactly how Craig Hicks, a New Atheist, interpreted that message when he murdered 3 Muslim students execution style at the University of North Carolina in 2015.
In court, they told him that all 3 victims lived a life to be proud of, that Hicks only saw them for their Islamic religion and never tried to get to know them as the people that they were.
They dedicated their lives to Allah, God. They died having never ever given their parents, their siblings, their friends, or their colleagues an unpleasant day.
But the New Atheist movement that Hicks and millions of others like him belong to has since disappeared from view. They are no longer relevant, no longer visible. So it is New Atheism, not Islam, that has been vanquished to the dustbin of history. As Islam continues to grow, even as rates of religiosity decline in the West. So if we are to declare Islam the winner and New Atheism the loser, then the question is, how did this happen? Well, what happened is simple. Islam speaks to truth, hope, and justice, whereas New Atheism sputters only lies, generalizations, and prejudice towards the religious belief of 2 billion Muslims. And where Islam is humble and noble, New Atheism is self-aggrandizing and conceited, which is why Islam has stood firm for 1500 years, whereas New Atheism died barely a decade after slinking out of the gutter. You see, New Atheists got away with their bogus claims about Islam being responsible for 9/11 when there was an absence of data about suicide bombings. Eventually, however, that data came when actual academics like Professor Robert Pape studied and analysed the motivation behind every suicide attack that has occurred since 1980. He found the real driving force behind so-called Islamic terrorism to be a cocktail of motivations, including politics, humiliation, revenge, and sometimes even altruism, but never Islam. For instance, Pape found that Palestinian suicide bombers never killed themselves for religious motives, but exclusively for their people's legitimate and lawful struggle against the criminal Israeli occupation and blockade. In other words, so-called Islamic terrorism is rooted in real-world grievances, not celestial aspirations.
About that for a moment. What do most people think is driving suicide terrorism? Religion. Any older religion? No. Islamic fundamentalism. It doesn't hold up, ladies and gentlemen. It simply doesn't hold up. The facts don't fit.
One by one, the New Atheist falsehoods unraveled, putting in clear sight their intellectual bankruptcy and degeneracy, while also exposing their lack of qualified expertise.
I would like to come back to an earlier point, if I may, too, and that is the notion that atheists are somehow the intelligentsia among us and so forth. I think this is just completely false. The spate of new books published by the new atheists like Harris and Hitchens and Dawkins and so forth are not sophisticated books intellectually. These are, for the most part, angry, bitter diatribes against religion. And while someone like Dawkins may be a good scientist in his field, when he begins to talk about philosophy and theology, he is merely a layman.
New Atheism was never able to wrestle with Islam's moral and ethical framework, which flows directly from its primary creed of belief in God as the creator and sustainer of the universe. It drives them crazy that Islam's divinely inspired law has withstood the test of time. New Atheism, on the other hand, pushes the same dangerous utopian falsehood the Nazis and Soviets pushed in claiming mankind can evolve and progress morally by eliminating religious belief and unwanted populations. It was this utopian dream that mobilized the Holocaust and communist pogroms of the previous century.
Nothing in Darwin. In Darwin's Origin of the Species, he never posited that human beings evolved morally. In fact, Darwin wrote, I think correctly, that we're captive to irrational forces and to our animal natures. And so what they've done is make a leap of faith, really, that is just as egregious and just as self-delusional as the leap of faith made by Christian fundamentalists.
And at the same time their falsehoods began unraveling, the moral rot that sits within the New Atheist movement came to light, with one prominent New Atheist after another hit with allegations of sexual misconduct and rape, including David Silverman, Lawrence Krauss, Michael Shermer, and Neil deGrasse Tyson. But on top of all that, there's the realization that New Atheists are just miserably unhappy people, with studies showing they suffer high rates of depression due to an absence of social support from a faith community or lack of commitment to a belief system that makes sense of traumatic events and difficult life stressors. Muslims, on the other hand, have close-knit communities and a belief system that helps them make sense of a chaotic world. So it's hardly surprising then that New Atheism lost so badly in its declared war against Islam. Ultimately, the world came to see that the New Atheist invectives against Muslims resembled only the rowdy, uneducated ramblings of backwards racists rather than appraisals based on intellect, rationality, and reason, writes my friend Nathan Lean in his remarkable book. That said, yes, New Atheism has been defeated, but the anti-Islam ideas they espoused are now being parroted by other anti-Muslim movements, including the Hindu nationalist movement in India, the Han Chinese nationalist movement in China, and Buddhist supremacist movements in both Sri Lanka and Myanmar. Clearly, our fight for truth and justice must continue to march forward. Anyway, that's my time for today. please don't forget to subscribe to this channel, and we kindly ask you please support this endeavor by becoming a member of this show at patreon.com/CJWerleman. We can't produce, sustain and grow this show without your help, and we offer exclusive benefits to those who do. But for now, good night, good morning, wherever you are, and stay blessed.